What if everything you were taught about how to make someone fall in love with you is exactly what has been pushing that person away? I'm not talking about some abstract theory. I'm talking about something that happens every single day in silence, without anyone noticing, without anyone telling you. There are men who give everything they have, who surrender completely, who do exactly what they're supposed to do, and yet they end up alone. Not because they're lacking something visible, not because they're bad people, but because nobody ever explained to them how the human mind really works when it comes to love. And the worst part isn't even that. The worst part is that the harder they try, the further they drift from the result they're looking for. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you over the next few minutes is going to radically change the way you understand relationships, attraction, and yourself. These aren't techniques. They aren't cheap tricks pulled from some seduction manual. This is pure psychology. It's internal structure. And once you truly understand it, you'll never be able to see relationships the same way again. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And the way you react to the possibility of love, to the fear of loss, to the uncertainty of another person's feelings, reveals everything about your internal foundation. And that foundation is what determines whether you attract or repel. Let's start from the beginning. There is a very specific moment when most men lose someone without even realizing it. It's not during an argument. It's not when they make an obvious mistake. It's much earlier than that. It's the instant they decide unconsciously that their worth depends on another person's approval. That moment, that small internal shift changes everything. Because from that point on, every action, every message, every gesture stops coming from a place of abundance and starts coming from a place of fear. And the human mind, even without putting it into words, detects that difference with brutal precision. Think about the last time someone tried desperately to impress you. The context doesn't matter. It could be a friend, a co-worker, someone in a conversation. There was something about that dynamic that made you slightly uncomfortable, wasn't there? You couldn't point your finger at it exactly, but you felt it. Something didn't fit. Something smelled like need. And even if that person said all the right things, even if they did everything correctly on paper, you noticed there was something behind every single act. A silent agenda, a search for validation that colored everything they did. That is exactly what happens in romantic relationships. But multiplied by 10, because in that context, emotional sensitivity is completely raw. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When your thoughts are colored by fear and need, your soul reflects that. You become anxious, reactive, and easily controlled. But when your thoughts are colored by self-respect and inner stability, your soul reflects that too. You become grounded, present, and magnetic. And that magnetism is what draws others to you without effort. Now here comes the part almost nobody wants to hear. That pattern didn't come out of nowhere. It comes from a very specific story you were told since childhood. A narrative that seemed logical, that seemed noble, even admirable. You were told that love is proven through devotion, that if you truly care about someone, you sacrifice yourself, that the more you give, the more you deserve to be loved in return. And that idea, even though it comes from a beautiful place, has an enormous crack running right through its center because it confuses devotion with need. It confuses generosity with emotional dependency. And above all, it assumes that love works like a transaction, that if you accumulate enough points, if you're consistent enough, if you show enough dedication, then the other person will have to feel something. But love is not a debt. It doesn't work that way. And psychology has been proving that for decades. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And one of the greatest wastes is the time we spend trying to earn love through sacrifice, when love is not something that can be earned. It is something that is freely given. And when you try to earn it through effort, you often push it further away. There's a concept that social psychology researchers call reactance, and it's fascinating. When a person feels that their freedom is being pressured, that someone is pushing them toward a feeling or a decision, the emotional system reacts in the opposite direction. Not because that person is cruel or calculating, but because the human mind has a very primitive defense mechanism that detects pressure and rejects it almost automatically. In other words, the more you push someone toward you, the more you activate in that person the impulse to pull away. And yet, there are men who have spent years pushing, years sending messages that never get a reply, years always being the first to write, the first to suggest, the first to give in. And they wonder what they're doing wrong. The answer isn't in what they do, it's in what they are when they do those things. It's in the internal place from which they act. There is an enormous difference between a man who calls because he wants to share something real and a man who calls because he needs to confirm that he still matters. From the outside, the action looks identical. On the inside, they are two completely different realities. And the person on the other end of the phone feels that even if they can't name it. Epictetus taught, "No great thing is created suddenly." And the ability to call from a place of genuine sharing rather than need is not created suddenly. It is built through practice, through self-awareness, through the willingness to sit with your own feelings before acting on them. And as you build that ability, you become less reactive. And as you become less reactive, you become more attractive. Now, I want you to think about something for a few seconds. Think about those people you know or have seen from a distance who seem to attract others without any apparent effort. I'm not talking about the best-looking ones or the richest or those with the most polished speech. I'm talking about the ones who simply generate an invisible gravity. Who, when they walk into a room, something in the atmosphere shifts. Who, when they speak, people listen. Who, when they take an interest in someone, that someone feels special in a way they can't quite explain. What do those people have that others don't? It's not physical, it's not money, it's not charisma learned from some course. It's something far deeper and at the same time far more accessible than you think. It's an internal quality that psychologists call autonomous emotional regulation. Though I prefer to describe it with a single word, foundation. They have a foundation, an emotional foundation that doesn't depend on what happens outside. A stability that doesn't waver when someone doesn't reply to their message. A center that doesn't shift when a situation becomes uncertain. These are people who can be in the middle of chaos and still remain recognizable to themselves. Who can receive a signal of distance from someone they care about and not spiral into panic, who can live with ambiguity without turning it into catastrophe. And that, at a neurological level, is enormously attractive. Not because it's a trick or a performance, but because the human emotional system, at its most primitive core, is constantly seeking safety. It looks for signals that the person in front of you is trustworthy. Not just trustworthy in the sense of being honest, but trustworthy in the sense of being stable. In the sense that they're not going to become an emotional burden. In the sense that they'll be able to hold themselves together when things get hard. And when a person finds that in someone else, something inside them loosens. Their guard comes down. They allow themselves to be present in a way they simply don't allow with other people. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When you have a solid emotional foundation, you are exercising that power. You are not letting external events dictate your internal state. You are calm. You are grounded. And that groundedness is what makes people want to be near you. But here's the problem. Most men who don't have that foundation try to fake it. They tell themselves they're going to act like they don't care, that they're going to play mysterious, that they're going to apply some calculated distance technique. And for a while, it sometimes works, but sooner or later the mask falls off because real stability cannot be simulated indefinitely. Human beings are extraordinarily good at detecting inconsistencies, especially on the emotional level. The person beside you starts to notice that something doesn't add up. That, in certain moments when their guard drops, an anxiety appears that wasn't there before. That after a small disagreement, the reaction is disproportionate. That behind the calculated calm, there is an enormous fear of losing control of the situation. And at that point, everything built with such effort crumbles far faster than it was raised. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future. When you are anxiously dependent on her approval, you cannot enjoy the present moment. You are always looking for signs, always analyzing, always worried. But when you can let go of that anxious dependence, you become free to be present. And presence is what creates real connection. I remember talking with someone who described a relationship he'd had for almost 2 years. He told me he had done everything right, that he had been attentive, present, generous, that he had never been absent when she needed him, that he had put the relationship ahead of almost everything else in his life, and that despite all of that, one day she told him she felt something was missing, that she couldn't explain it, but there was an emotional distance she couldn't bridge. He didn't understand it. From his perspective, he had given everything. From her perspective, there was something that had never really been fully present, him. Because while he was pouring all his energy into the relationship, he had stopped existing as an individual. His personal projects were on hold. His friendships had slowly dissolved. His own interests had been pushed to the back seat. He had become an extension of the relationship, rather than a person with his own life who was choosing to be in that relationship. And that distinction, which seems subtle, changes absolutely everything, because nobody falls in love with a mirror. Nobody builds a deep bond with someone who doesn't have their own world to invite you into. Love is not fusion. It's encounter. And for there to be an encounter, there have to be two real individuals approaching each other from their own center. When one of the two doesn't have that center, what happens is not love. It's dependency with good intentions. And dependency, no matter how much it disguises itself as devotion, creates a burden in the other person that over time becomes unsustainable. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And when you react to the relationship by dissolving yourself, you are reacting from fear. You are not being present as yourself. You are being present as an echo of what you think she wants. And that echo cannot create connection. Now, let's be completely honest. This isn't easy to accept, because it means admitting that the problem wasn't outside. It wasn't her or him or the timing or bad luck. It was an incomplete understanding of how attraction and emotional bonding actually work from the inside, and accepting that hurts. But it's also the only thing that opens the door to real change. So, what does having a solid emotional foundation actually look like in practice? It's not indifference, it's not coldness. It's not putting up a wall and pretending nothing affects you. It's exactly the opposite. It's the ability to feel deeply without that feeling destabilizing you. It's being able to care for someone without needing that person to be the source of your equilibrium. You see it in the simplest everyday moments. When she's had a hard day and arrives carrying tension, you don't get defensive or sink down with her. You stay grounded. You listen from a calm place. And that space you create makes her feel genuinely safe. Not because you planned it, but because that's who you are. When something goes differently than expected, you don't spiral into obsessive analysis, searching for hidden signals in every message. You manage the uncertainty from a place of self-confidence. Not from the certainty that everything will go well, but from the certainty that you'll be fine no matter what happens when she pulls back a little. You don't interpret it as the beginning of the end. You don't flood her with messages. You don't manufacture conflict just to provoke a reaction that confirms she's still there. You trust. You give space. And that trust, that ability not to panic at silence, sends a quiet message that no words could ever convey as clearly. This man doesn't break. And there is something in that message that triggers a very particular response in the female emotional system. It's not intellectual admiration. It's something more visceral. It's the sensation of being able to let go, of being able to be herself without having to manage someone else's emotional state, of being able to occupy her own space without feeling that space being consumed by the other person's need. That is what creates real connection. That is what distinguishes a relationship with depth from one that runs on inertia. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When your thoughts are colored by stability and trust, your soul reflects that. And people will feel it. They will be drawn to it, not because you are trying to attract them, but because you are a source of stability in a world of chaos. But there is a second dimension to all of this that is equally important, and that very few people ever truly grasp, and it has to do with a psychological principle that operates constantly in relationships without us ever being aware of it. People value what they build, not what they receive. There are decades of behavioral psychology research documenting this phenomenon. When someone invests time, energy, or attention in something, their brain automatically increases the perceived value of that thing. It's not a conscious decision. It's a cognitive mechanism that justifies the investment by assigning greater importance to whatever has been invested in. They call it the IKEA effect. When you assemble a piece of furniture yourself, even if it comes out a bit crooked, you value it more than one that came pre-assembled from the factory. Not because it's objectively better, but because you put something of yourself into it. Relationships work the same way. When someone has had to earn something, when they've put in real effort, when they've actively chosen to be in that bond, their brain assigns it a completely different emotional weight than it would if everything had arrived at no cost. And this is where almost all the mistakes concentrate. A man who gives everything from the very beginning, who is available at all times, who always initiates, who always yields, who organizes everything, who pays for everything, who adapts to everything, who anticipates every need before it's even expressed. That man, without knowing it, is eliminating every opportunity for the other person to invest. He is solving everything before there is even a problem to solve. He is filling every space before she has a chance to fill it herself. And the result is that that person, no matter how much she appreciates him, no matter how attentive and generous she finds him, never develops the kind of deep attachment that only grows when you have put something of yourself into the bond. What costs nothing doesn't hurt to lose. And that is not cruelty. It is basic human psychology working exactly as it was designed to work. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And one of the greatest wastes is the time we spend doing all the work in a relationship while the other person invests nothing. Because when the other person invests nothing, they feel nothing. And when they feel nothing, they can walk away without looking back. I know the case of a man who had spent months in a dynamic he couldn't understand. Every time he sensed the relationship cooling a little, he doubled his effort. More gestures, more attention, more initiative. And every time he did, the distance widened just a little more until one day he made a decision that went completely against his instincts. He stopped, not out of strategy, not because someone had told him it would work, but because he was exhausted, because carrying the full weight of something that was supposed to be shared had left him with no energy for anything else. And then something curious happened. When he stopped filling all the spaces, a void appeared. And she, for the first time, had to decide whether she wanted to fill it. She started suggesting plans. She started writing first. She started showing a curiosity about his life that she hadn't shown before. Small things, but with enormous weight, because they came from her, not as a response to his effort. And with each small investment from her, something shifted in the dynamic because now both of them were building. And when two people build together, the bond has a completely different kind of solidity. This doesn't mean you have to be cold. It doesn't mean you have to play games or calculate every gesture. It means leaving space, trusting that if someone wants to be there, they will show up. Resisting the impulse to fill every silence, to resolve every uncertainty, to always do the emotional work for both of you. Because the most uncomfortable truth in all of this is that a bond built by only one person is not a bond. It is a one-sided dependency with an expiration date. Epictetus taught, "No great thing is created suddenly," and a bond built by two people is not created suddenly. It is built through the accumulation of small investments, each one adding another layer of commitment. And as you build that bond, it becomes stronger, more resilient, more lasting. And this is where something that requires a great deal of internal honesty comes in. Ask yourself with the same clarity you would apply to any other situation in your life. Whether in your relationships you have been building or whether you have been begging, whether you have been present as an individual or whether you have been dissolving yourself into the dynamic, hoping that would be enough to make the other person stay. I'm not asking you this so you can judge yourself. I'm asking because the answer changes the direction of everything that comes after. There is a very specific moment when a man stops being attractive. Not in a physical sense, but in the deepest and most lasting sense of the word. It's the moment when his emotional well-being starts to depend on what another person does or doesn't do. In that moment, even without saying anything, even without anything external changing, something invisible shifts and the person beside him begins to feel a weight that wasn't there before. That weight is the responsibility of regulating someone else's emotional state, and it is one of the most exhausting things that can exist inside a relationship. Think about it from the other side. Imagine that every time you have a bad day, someone around you panics. That every time you need space, that person interprets your space as an alarm signal. That every time you don't reply immediately, you receive 3 more messages. That every conversation has a layer of anxiety underneath it that no one says out loud, but everyone can feel. How long would you put up with that? How often would you actually want to be around that person? The honest answer, even if it's uncomfortable, is not very long, not very often. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. Because human beings seek connection, but we also seek freedom within that connection. We look for someone to grow with, not someone we have to constantly prop up. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When your thoughts are colored by anxiety and need, your soul reflects that. You become someone who is draining to be around. But when your thoughts are colored by stability and self-sufficiency, your soul reflects that too. You become someone who is a source of strength for others." Emotional stability is not a quality you either have or don't have in some fixed, permanent way. It's something you build. It's a muscle. And like every muscle, it develops through consistent practice, through awareness of when it's failing, and through the willingness to work on it, even when it's uncomfortable, and there's something nobody ever tells you about that process while you're building it, while you're developing your own center, while you're creating a life with real direction and purpose. Something also changes in the way you perceive relationships. You stop looking for someone to complete you, because you no longer feel that void that needs to be filled from outside. You start looking for someone with whom to expand what already exists. And that subtle difference transforms everything, because relationships that are born from abundance have a completely different texture from those born from scarcity. Those born from abundance have room for the other person, for their needs, their silences, their individuality. Those born from scarcity are constantly monitoring, evaluating, fearing the loss of whatever feels like the only possible source of well-being. And from the outside, that difference is perceptible. Even if no one names it, even if no one can articulate it with precision, there is one more thing I want to tell you, and it might be the hardest part of all of this to truly integrate. You cannot drag anyone toward love. You cannot generate in another person a feeling that has to be born inside of them. You can create the conditions. You can become the kind of person worth choosing. You can leave space for that choice to happen, but you cannot force it. And the attempt to do so always ends in the same place. There is a very human, very understandable tendency to want control over something you feel is slipping away. When someone you care about pulls back, the impulse is to act, to do something, to say something, to prove something, to reclaim that control, even through conflict, even by provoking a reaction that confirms the other person is still there. But that attempt at control reveals exactly what you most fear revealing. That without that person, something inside you doesn't know how to be okay. And that revelation, as paradoxical as it sounds, accelerates the very loss you're trying to prevent. The only real answer, the only one that has any lasting impact on the situation, is the one that turns inward, not toward the relationship, but toward yourself. Asking yourself which part of your stability you've been outsourcing to someone else. Which aspects of your life you've put on pause while waiting for the relational dynamic to resolve itself? What version of yourself would remain if you removed all the energy you pour into that bond? That question has more power than it appears to have, because the answer tells you exactly what you need to work on, not to become more attractive in some superficial sense, but to become more whole, more real, more truly yours. And when a man starts doing that work genuinely, not to impress anyone, not with the hope that it will change how a particular person sees him, but simply because his own life deserves that level of attention and care, something begins to change almost imperceptibly at first and then completely visibly. The way he moves through the world changes. The energy he projects without saying a single word changes. The kind of connections he begins to attract changes. And above all, his relationship with himself changes, which is in the end the only relationship over which you have absolute control and the only one from which all the others are built. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future." When you can build a life that is truly yours, you can enjoy the present without anxiously depending on anyone else. And that freedom is what makes you attractive. It is what makes you magnetic. It is what makes her want to be close to you. Everything I've described here is not abstract theory. These are psychological mechanisms that are operating right now in every relationship you have, in every interaction, in every moment when you decide how to respond to something that triggers your insecurity. And the good news, if it can be called that, is that none of these mechanisms are permanent or irreversible. The way you relate to your own emotional balance is something you can change. The tendency to seek validation outside yourself is something you can recognize and redirect. The habit of giving more than you receive without ever questioning whether the dynamic has any real reciprocity is something you can identify and transform. Not overnight, not with a single moment of reflection, but through sustained work over time that begins exactly where you are right now. Being honest about what is actually happening. Because emotional intelligence is not measured by how much you feel. It is measured by how much you understand about what you feel and by the capacity to act from that understanding rather than from impulse. And there is something I have always found powerful about that process. The moment a man stops asking, "What do I have to do for her to love me?" and starts asking, "Who do I need to become in order to live a life worth sharing?" That moment changes everything. Not because it's a beautiful phrase, but because it shifts the focus from the outside, where you have no control, to the inside, where you have all the control in the world. The relationships that last, the ones with real depth, don't come from chasing. They come from two people who meet when both of them are already building something on their own, who choose each other not because they need each other to survive, but because they make each other better, who stay together not out of fear of losing, but out of the active pleasure of continuing to build. That is the kind of relationship that doesn't need to be maintained through constant effort, because it has roots of its own, because both have truly invested, because neither one is holding the other in place. They are choosing each other day after day from a place of genuine freedom. And reaching that place starts with you. Not with the other person, not with circumstances. With you. You now have the information. The only question that remains, the only one that matters, is what you're going to do with it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When you cultivate thoughts of purpose, growth, and self-respect, your soul reflects that. And the world will see it, the world will feel it, and the world will be drawn to it. Because in a world of men who are chasing, a man who is centered in himself is a rare and precious thing. Be that man. Build that life. And watch how everything changes. If you made it to the end of this video, comment, "I made it," and I'll personally reply to you. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to be part of this community and hit like if you enjoyed it.